This is a painting that I started out painting plein air. So this is my quick study of the Beavertail Lighthouse. And now I am making a larger version using this small painting and some photo references that I took to do this larger piece. And I thought I would bring you in a little bit on what I'm doing here. When I paint plein air, I don't usually use the palette knife, but when I'm in the studio, I like to use the palette knife because I feel like it kind of offers me a little looser, more creative type brush strokes and overall style. And honestly, I am constantly fighting the tendency to get too literal about things. So like this painting already has kind of started out a little bit on the literal side, but as paintings go on, I often figure out ways to loosen it up. This day was a bit of an overcast, so it was unique lighting, you know, just not your typical straight, easy to decipher sunny day. That there were your clear shadow areas and bright sky, and it was sort of muted. And so I have to, when I'm plein air painting, I really have to kind of go back and forth with my colors to see what direction I need to go. And that's a really important step, particularly when you're painting on site, is just not to be afraid to dive in. You've got to start somewhere so you have something to work against, so to speak. So this is just me sort of even here, because I don't want to get quite as literal as I might in a plein air painting situation. When I'm out painting plein air, I'm really focusing on color and capturing that atmospheric light. When I'm in the studio, I'm looking for that creative edge and not being quite so precise and literal. But my training in seeing the color of light, plein air painting, has had a strong effect on how I see color, how I use color. So it comes into play. Often a rule of thumb, which I've kind of not completely done right here, is trying to keep your values when you're painting on top of another color, because the palette knife affords you the ability to let underlying colors show through. So keeping your values fairly close, you avoid either a chalky look or a muddy look. But that is kind of the cool thing about palette knife, is that it allows you to drag your paint or scumble your paint over color, which can lend to a really cool vibration and just really overall kind of neat look that I enjoy. I haven't gotten away. I didn't start out, and I don't, plein air painting, I don't paint an underpainting of orange. When I was learning to paint, I remember other students doing that, but that really kind of distorts your perception of color when you're trying to actually capture the color of light and the atmosphere in a plein air situation. In the case of painting in the studio, because I'm not being so literal to that aspect of things, I like and enjoy the vibration of the orange sort of peeking through here and there, and I make decisions as I go along how much of it I want to show through in any given place, but it's kind of a neat effect. So I'm kind of sticking with it for now, and particularly with studio painting, but I intend to teach the basics and concepts of plein air painting and seeing color and the color of light so that you can actually understand how to capture lighting effects, so that you have the choice of not being overly formulaic if you so choose. So there's a lot more. This is, a good sized painting. There's a lot more I want to do to this sky, but I really should move on to the other parts because that helps a lot in determining, you really need to compare the whole painting as one. So if you get too bogged down just doing one aspect, you can lose sight of what the end result will be. And again, even though I am not being 100% true to the plein air capturing the color of light concept, it is still a part of my thinking. I just am breaking the so-called rules regarding it in some ways. So, but it affects how I approach a painting. So getting to know your color and how color works. Color against color, because everything is relative. So something that may appear dark in one place could appear light in another, and a particular color could really stand out when it's next to something else. So this part of the painting, this is sort of an underpainting I'm doing right now. Besides the orange, it's the underpainting over the underpainting. And I really want, my intention for this area is for this to be very loose and abstract, not even defined at all. That is my hope and goal with this part. But this kind of purpley color is just, this day, again, it was such kind of a weird day, not full sun and not full overcast. And of course it kind of changed too as the day went on. So certain violets, magentas, colors like that can express depending on where you're using it, a feeling of light, like sun, warmth, in conjunction with everything else that you put around it. So again, everything plays off everything else, but because this is not a full-on, I don't want to go too warm with my underpainting, but it's like a little back and forth, so you can kind of layer some of the warmer colors. And I'm just going initially for the sunlit areas, and I'm gonna kind of get the darks in there soon, because that does help too if you get some of your darks in there in describing the light. So I'm referring back to my plein air painting too. I don't want to forget about that, because that's the light that I saw with my naked eye, and there's no better camera than your naked eye for seeing color. So I just am referring to it so I don't lose sight of what that day was actually like. A fun thing too, that once you get into actually plein air painting and you start to learn about color, it's kind of cool how, like, a color that's called manganese blue, but it's kind of like a cerulean blue. It can almost have a green-like effect in certain areas. And then, of course, you get right into your greens, whether it's the green light or even Viridian, and you put it into this setting, you might call it, on top of these magentas, along with these more warm orangey yellows, and it's just such a vibration. It's like amazing, and you actually see it when you're out there painting. It's not something easily seen in the beginning when you're just learning, but when you kind of force the issue, in my case, when I was learning about this, I kind of pretty much just copied my teacher because I just couldn't see it. But then I started to see it. So you kind of have to just trust and not treat your paintings like a masterpiece. Allow for mistakes, because you never grow, you never have happy accidents, as Bob Ross might say. You gotta just let it flow, have fun, and don't be afraid. Pretty much most mediums, maybe not watercolor so much, but most mediums you can fix. Once it's dry or whatever, just paint over it or something. But it's not. One thing that's real important to keep in mind in your whole overall painting is the values, and making sure when you scan your scene that you have your values, because that's what makes a painting interesting, is having a focal point, having things pop out. And so this is why, like, I should get some darks in here, get some of the shadow areas of the rocks, that's going to help me also give me a clearer picture of where I need to go. Can't be afraid, like I said, to put something down, and if it's wrong, you go back and adjust it. It's just part of the process. Just because an area is in shadow doesn't always necessarily mean it's going to be cool either. And then of course you've got the rocks coloration, it's natural coloration, so you know, we're thinking about how the light is affecting the color. So we're not only got the direct light overhead, we've got the reflected light. You know, all of those things are dictating the kind of colors to use, and that's why, again, you have to just be bold and go after it and try. Just keep trying and making adjustments as you go. So this is not anywhere near in a completed state, but I'm already kind of liking, I've dragged some of this into some of the lighter colors, which has adjusted the, you know, the light of some of the rock formation, which is happening naturally. And again, I'm not being overly critical in this stage of the game about my color. It's on my mind. I'm making choices with light and the reflected light and things like that in the back of my mind, but because I've gotten to the stage, which is something I want to help people get to as well, of taking that knowledge and kind of running with it, you know, just exploring and finding my own creativity, you might say, and not being locked down to any particular discipline, which, you know, some artists can get very protective and defensive about their particular discipline, regardless of what it is. And I'm not really interested in going there, because part of my desire to be an artist is to explore my creativity, you know, see how far I can push things and go. But in my particular case, my more formal studies, where I learned to see color, again, it really affected the choices that I make. I don't completely just abandon that training. So my hope is to help students to get that foundation that I got, hopefully, you know, a little quicker than it took me. And then you can start pushing towards your own creative journey. But, you know, learning to see color and kind of getting to those basic areas is important. I've had, you know, many people express the desire to paint like me. And it took me many years to get to where I am, which, you know, personal and family obligations slowed me down some, but I think that I can help artists go through this process quicker, because I remember like it was yesterday how I felt starting out, you know, the feeling the insecurities, the just not getting things, and I just have a really close connection to that time of just learning. I remember a fellow student who came into the classroom, you might say, after me, and I just felt her pain of, you know, feeling embarrassed to make a mistake or do something wrong, and it's just, I totally get that. So, you know, my hope is to kind of get people moving along a little quicker. Palette knife is a lot of fun. I really enjoy using the palette knife, but at the very beginning stages it was very awkward. I was used to doing very detailed type work, so wielding a palette knife was not the most comfortable place for me, and I've heard other people talk about that.